me to the book of Judges, the 21st chapter, at the 15th verse. I'll be reading verses 15 through 25. Benjamites did. While the young women were dancing, each man caught one and carried her off to be his wife. I just want to talk with you all from the sermonic topic entitled, The Dancing Girls. Their joy and playfulness turned into weeping and sadness. This is why they are called the sobbing women. This is an example Adam uses to incite his brothers to be strong men and to do the same. If you've ever seen the musical Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, then you know the premise of the movie. And apparently, it doesn't matter how you get one, just so long as you do. Now, please enter the conversation, the book whose refrain rings, in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone saw fit in his own eyes. The book of Judges has often stayed far, far away from because of its bloody, violent, and seemingly capricious content. The only book that may speak of more seamless or senseless slaughter is the book of Joshua. But Judges is a book where we learn of great leaders. Leaders that lead the people of God only for a little while. Long-standing leadership, it seems, was not prized in Israel in those days, because we hear of great leaders like Deborah. We hear of great leaders like Samson. We hear of great leaders like Gideon, all who only led Israel for a little while. We hear the story of Jael and Sisera. Y'all know that story, don't you? That's the story where she drives a spike through this man's skull. I told you Judges was a bloody, violent book. Jephthah and his daughter, he's the one who sacrifices his daughter after making a stupid pledge. And when she runs out the door and greets her daddy after he returns home from war, then after Israel has been given the victory, he must sacrifice his own daughter. I told y'all Judges was a bloody and a violent book. And then lastly, the kidnapping of the dancing girls. Kidnapped in a moment of joy and playfulness, turned into sobbing women. So far, we have listened briefly to two distinct stories that have very similar plots. Women in moments of joy and playfulness carried away and turned into sobbing women. I know y'all keep up with the news, so we'll just go ahead and enter the conversation. 276 girls in a Nigerian town called Tribble. 276 girls carried away by a terrorist group while at school, while at a place of supposed safety. Perhaps they were on the schoolyard in moments of recess, jumping double dutch. Maybe they were singing Little Sally Walker, sitting in a saucer, crying and weeping over all he have done. Or maybe they were dancing to the newest pop song. In a moment, girls who would normally be dancing are carried away and turned into sobbing women. Joy and playfulness stolen. In all three of these stories, Tribble, the dancing girls, and seven brides for seven brothers all hold a common core. They all hold a common core and give witness to the bloody truth that has even been glorified and is present even in this very moment. Each one of these bears witness to a male-centered self-understanding that allows men or boys, males, to enter the space of women or girls, steal their joy and playfulness, and relegate them to sobbing women. At the center of each one of these stories is conquest. The desire to take and control another's position in life. Go with me more fully into this morning's text. A story that begins with a priest and his side piece. A story that begins with a preacher and his honey dip. A pastor and his boothing. This preacher, pastor, Levite, priest, honey dip, side piece, boothing, concubine left him. She left because he was not treating her right. Now, if you go back and you look at the story, some versions will say that she was unfaithful to him, but if you go and wrestle with it in its original language, it's not clear to us whether she left because she was unfaithful or she left because he wasn't doing her right. And either way, maybe she was unfaithful because he wasn't doing her right. I don't know, the text is ambiguous like that, so maybe she just left because she had to get out of the situation. In any case, she went on home and she went to go see her father for about 4 months. And I'm just so glad that she got a chance to go home, because so many women, when they get into trouble with some man that everybody else told them was a good man, don't have a home to go to. And this is where our story takes place, because even after putting to death not just the Benjamites but another portion of Israel, leaving only the virgins, they give 400 women to the Benjamites. Now, I know y'all do your math well, so you got 600 Benjamites, you gave them 400, so now they're still 200 men without wives. And these are the men that are instructed to go to Shiloh, a place whose name carries the connotation of peace. Shiloh, the place where initially the tabernacle of the Lord rested. Shiloh, the place where they were having a festival with the dancing girls. Girls that just want to have fun. I know where your mind went, but we ain't talking about that kind of fun, because after all, they are at the church dance. It's the church picnic, and they're doing the electric slide and the wobble. Stolen in a moment of joy and playfulness. Their joy and the playfulness turned into sobbing women. If I were in a classroom, I would tell you that these three stories are situated in a much larger framework that some would call a meta-narrative. This is simply to say a large, encompassing, encapsulating, enveloping story, a story that is particular to women and yet includes men. This is the story that is much larger than Shabbat, the Bring Back Our Girls Home campaign, the kidnapping of the dancing girls at Shiloh, or even 7 brides for 7 brothers. Each of these speak to a distinct reality that speaks of a male-centered idea that states that men can do with women and women's bodies what we please. The other day I had the day off, so I went to the park, and randomly I ran into somebody that I did not know. Then he stated, and I quote exactly, "That's what we do. We dominate women." This attitude, this teaching that pervades and creates what I told you is a meta-narrative. A meta-narrative that allows, harbors, and sustains attitudes and understandings and thoughts that silently give license to these three smaller stories that we gasp, that we hold our breath at, and that we are horrified when we hear them. This large story is one that gives permission to men to violate women in the most egregious ways, not by attempting only to control their bodies, but also their minds and their spirits. Certainly, Shabbat is one of the more outstanding and fantastic, what we might say, smaller stories in this grand narrative, but its story is much larger, much more encompassing, encapsulating, and enveloping. It is the story of 1 in 3 women being raped in this nation. It is 1 in 4 girls being sexually abused, some violently and others on dates with acquaintances, boyfriends, friends, fiancés, and even husbands. It is the story of the hushing and quieting down of those voices who have survived these atrocities. I want you to notice that the dancing girls in Judges do not speak. They have nothing to say. They are kidnapped, but they have nothing to say. I can guarantee you this, if you took me, I would have something to say, even if it's just a loud sob or a cry, a scream, a yell, or something. I would have something to say. Imagine had there been one righteous brother who took this seriously, who stood up and said, go to Shiloh. Why? These girls haven't done anything to anybody. This mess has been caused by our own foolishness. This cycle must be broken. Perhaps those young women would still be dancing. What if the Nigerian had taken seriously the threats issued by Boko Haram, the terrorist group? Perhaps those girls would still be at the schoolhouse playing Little Sally Walker. Perhaps then those women, those girls would not have to sob because they'd be too busy being joyous and playful. You see, it really boils down to a question of leadership. Not male leadership or female leadership, but God-directed leadership. When there is a lack of leadership, girls don't dance. Tribe drags on, and 7 brothers think it's all right to go grab 7 women and make them their wives. This is Israel. This is where we stand. We as a nation, as community, as faith and secular communities, we lack God-directed leadership in some very important places. Leadership that stands up and says, this is what the Lord says, and this ain't right. By now, you're wondering, where is the good news? I know I've gone through my analysis of the situation. It's saying that we serve a good God. And so there's got to be some good news. You're saying, I understand what you're saying about these smaller stories. I get what you're saying about the meta-narrative. I understand what you're saying about a lack of God-directed leadership. But Trib, where is the good news? Well, the good news is in the history. And it is even right next door in the text. The history is that God still uses these people. And even as this book ends with this most famous phrase, in those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And this ends the book with a lack of God-directed leadership, but it transitions us into another story. I told you that it was right next door. This story that is right next door is about a woman by the name of Ruth. She was a woman who, instead of having her moment stolen from her, she determined that she was going to do her own thing and allow God to direct her steps. Ruth made her own move. She went where she wanted to go, and eventually she married whom she wanted to marry. Good things happen when women are allowed to make the best decisions for themselves, and we brothers don't try to get in the way and muck things up, understanding that on some things we're just along for the ride. And it was because of her decisions that she met a man by the name of Boaz. I told y'all there is some good news. And because she met and married a man by the name of Boaz, she had a son by the name of Obed. And the Bible tells us that Obed had a son by the name of Jesse. And Jesse kept on moving, and God kept moving through these people by the name of Israel. And Jesse had a son by the name of David, and God just kept on moving through these people by the name of Israel. And David had a son by the name of Solomon, and Solomon had a son by the name of Rehoboam, and God kept on moving through these people. Rehoboam had a son by the name of Abijah, and Abijah Asaph, and Asaph Jehoshaphat, and God kept on moving through these people. And I heard Brother Matthew say it like this, that he came down through 40 and 2 generations, and God kept on moving.